They called it the calmest neighborhood in America. No storms, no wind, not even the whisper of a leaf. But when Ethan opened his window, the air shifted, and the HOA finally woke up. The air was still when Ethan and Lila Calloway first drove through the white iron gates of Highridge Estates. The sun hung low, suspended over rows of perfect houses like a painting, not a leaf moving, not a sound out of place. Even the wind seemed to stop and watch as their car rolled past homes worth more than they could ever afford. Lila rested her chin on her hand, staring at the identical lawns, each edged with surgical precision. "It's beautiful," she murmured, though her voice carried unease. Ethan smiled, pretending not to notice. He'd worked years for this, promotions, late nights, cutting every corner he could to afford this place. A quiet community, the kind that promised safety, order, and peace. That's all he wanted. The guard at the entrance, a tall man with glassy eyes and a grin too practiced, waved them through after checking their papers. The name tag on his blazer read, Mr. Lang. "Welcome to Highridge Estates," he said with a voice that didn't blink, "where peace is permanent." Their house was the last one on Windmere Lane, a white two-story mansion with a porch that gleamed even in the dying light. The lawn was lush, the hedges flawless. The welcome packet was already sitting on their doorstep, tied with a gold ribbon. Inside, the air was perfectly cool. Not too warm, not too cold. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Lila smiled. "This is it. Our fresh start." But Ethan hesitated. The silence inside the house wasn't natural. It wasn't just quiet. It was absence. The kind that pressed against your eardrums, making you too aware of your own breathing. That night, after unpacking, they stood by the window, looking out across the neighborhood. Every single house had its curtains open and lights on. Not one of them flickered, not even when thunder rolled in the distance. "Do they all leave their lights on?" Lila whispered. Ethan shrugged. "Probably some HOA rule." He said it jokingly, but when they opened the community manual the next morning, the joke vanished. Rule No. 1. Windows must remain closed after sundown. Rule No. 2. Outdoor objects that disturb natural airflow are prohibited. Rule No. 3. Wind chimes, fans, or personal ventilation systems are forbidden. Rule No. 4. Residents must respect the clause of stillness. At the bottom, a line was highlighted in gold ink. Peace requires control. Control requires obedience. Ethan frowned. "Clause of stillness? What is that?" Lila laughed nervously. "Probably their weird way of saying no noise. Rich people love control." Still, that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, not humid, just watching. Every time he reached to crack a window, a faint hum echoed through the vents, low and disapproving, like the house itself was sighing. The next morning, a neighbor appeared on their doorstep with cookies and an immaculate smile. She introduced herself as Mrs. Crane, the HOA president. Her hair was silver but perfect, her perfume sharp and sweet. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway," she said, stepping closer than comfort allowed. "You'll find Highridge Estates to be calming. We like to keep things that way." Ethan nodded politely. "Of course, it's beautiful here." Her eyes flicked toward the slightly open kitchen window behind him. "You'll want to keep that closed," she said softly. "The wind doesn't belong to everyone." Then she handed Lila a gold envelope. Inside was their HOA covenant, embossed, elaborate, signed in ink that shimmered faintly. The signature line beneath theirs was already filled out. The Board of Stillness. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Ethan noticed something else. The trees never swayed. The flowers never fluttered. Even the smoke from a neighbor's barbecue rose straight upward, unmoved by any current. When he mentioned it, Lila waved him off. "You're overthinking it. Maybe it's just the valley, air pressure or something." But as night fell, Ethan swore he heard faint murmurs outside. Not voices, whispers riding nothing. No wind, no movement. Yet the sound slid through the air like breath against skin. He stood by the window again, watching the neighborhood. Every house glowed like a lantern, every curtain perfectly still, every shadow perfectly placed. Then, from across the street, one shadow moved. Just one. A man stood in his yard, whispering into empty air. His hands made small gestures, slow and rhythmic as if shaping invisible currents. Ethan stared, his breath fogging the glass. Suddenly, the man's head snapped toward him, eyes glowing faintly white. Ethan stumbled back. When he looked again, the man was gone. The next morning, a letter lay on their welcome mat. Notice of infraction number 1. Unauthorized air movement detected at lot 43. Fine, $660. Lila laughed nervously when Ethan showed her. Okay, that's creepy, but it's got to be some system error, right? Ethan didn't answer. The letter had been hand-delivered. There was no envelope, no signature. Only the faint scent of ozone clinging to the paper. That night, as they lay in bed, Lila asked quietly, "Do you hear that?" He did. A faint, hollow breathing. Not human, not mechanical. Seeping through the walls like the house was inhaling. Ethan whispered, "It's just the vents." But the vents whispered back. By the third night, Ethan could no longer convince himself the house was normal. Every breath he took felt heavier, as though the air resisted him. Thick, deliberate, intelligent. Even his phone's weather app claimed the wind speed outside was 0 miles per hour every single day without fail. The stillness had shape, almost a personality, and it pressed against him whenever he stepped outside after dark. He told Lila about the breathing sounds again, about the man who stood outside whispering to nothing. She dismissed it, though her eyes betrayed her. She hadn't slept either. There were moments when she froze mid-step, tilting her head slightly, as though listening to something distant, something neither of them could name. "Ethan," she finally said, "this place is perfect, maybe too perfect. But if you keep talking about weird things, they might think we're the problem." He almost laughed, but the thought stuck. In Highridge Estates, perfection wasn't natural. It was enforced, and the HOA was the one enforcing it. The next morning, Ethan decided to attend the HOA meeting at the community center, if only to prove to himself that everything was fine. The letter had said attendance was mandatory for the maintenance of environmental harmony. The center itself stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, a modern building with spotless windows and walls that gleamed like marble. Inside, a faint hum filled the air, like hidden engines turning somewhere behind the walls. Every seat was taken, every resident sitting perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. When Ethan walked in, the sound of his footsteps felt intrusive, like he'd broken some unspoken rhythm. Mrs. Crane stood at the front of the room, wearing a white blazer that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. Her voice was warm, melodic, and rehearsed. "We gather tonight," she said, "to ensure the calm remains unbroken. We are the guardians of stillness, and we pay for peace together." The audience murmured in unison, a low chant. "Together." Ethan forced a smile, leaning toward the man next to him. "What's this about, exactly?" he whispered. The man didn't turn his head, didn't blink, just whispered back, "We owe the air." Before Ethan could respond, Mrs. Crane's gaze cut across the room. "Mr. Calloway," she said sweetly, "we're delighted you've joined us. We were just discussing the penalties for unregistered breezes." The room turned toward him, all eyes perfectly aligned, every pair glowing faintly gold in the reflection of the lights. His throat tightened. "It was a mistake," he said quickly. I didn't mean to." "Of course you didn't," she interrupted. "That's why we forgive once." She gestured gracefully to the large mirror behind her. "The air forgives too, but it never forgets who breaks the stillness." That night, Ethan dreamed of spinning fans and whispering vents. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound of wind still echoing faintly in his ears. But when he checked the room, the curtains hung motionless, the trees outside frozen in their perfect shapes. Only the faintest vibration in the walls told him something was alive, something moving behind the silence. The next day, Lila found him in the garage, unscrewing a vent cover. "Ethan, stop," she hissed. "You'll get us fined again." He ignored her, shining a flashlight inside. The metal surface rippled, not from air, but like skin. The vent breathed. He dropped the flashlight, heart pounding. "Lila," he whispered, "these vents aren't just vents." That night the sound returned. Louder, closer. A deep exhale moved through the house, followed by whispers that made the drywall tremble. Lila clutched Ethan's arm. "It's inside," she whispered. "It's in the house." He grabbed his phone, opening the camera to record the sound. But when he looked through the lens, he saw faint outlines. Faces, transparent and swirling like smoke, drifting in the air above their bed. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The window slammed shut on its own. A voice came through the vents, slow and deliberate. "Violation number 2. Unauthorized curiosity." The lights flickered. The temperature dropped further. Ethan ran to the thermostat, but the screen had gone black. Every vent in the house began to hiss softly, like snakes waking from a dream. Lila screamed as the air began to twist, invisible but powerful enough to lift papers, topple chairs, and pull breath straight from their lungs. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. Silence. The air went still again, hanging thick and warm, like the world had hit pause. On the kitchen counter lay another gold envelope. Ethan opened it with shaking hands. Notice of hearing. "You are summoned to the Chamber of Stillness, 12 a.m., beneath the community center. Attendance is non-optional." He looked up at Lila. "We're leaving. Tonight." But when he opened the front door, the air outside pressed against him, like walking into invisible glass. It resisted, dense and immovable. He shoved harder, but it only pushed back. The entire night sky seemed sealed off, motionless, with not even a flicker of wind. Lila backed away, trembling. "Ethan, I don't think we can." They sat in silence until midnight, fear breathing for them. Then, almost on cue, the air shifted. It didn't move. It called. A low hum from beneath the floorboards, like distant turbines. The invitation. Ethan grabbed a flashlight. "If they want me there, I'll go. But I'm finding out what they're hiding." Lila tried to stop him, but the moment he opened the door, the air outside parted. Slowly, deliberately, forming a clear path toward the community center. Not wind, not nature. Something else. The street was lined with neighbors standing perfectly still, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. As Ethan passed, each one turned their head slightly toward him, like flowers following the sun. When he reached the center, the doors opened on their own. A voice echoed from the dark hall beyond. "Welcome, Mr. Calloway, the air has been waiting." The corridor beneath the community center was colder than night itself. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his hand, the beam cutting through a mist that wasn't quite fog. It moved in rhythm, pulsing with each step he took. The air smelled like ozone and copper, like a storm waiting to happen but never allowed to arrive. Somewhere deep below, a steady hum rose and fell, slow as breathing. The hallway opened into a massive circular room. The walls were smooth concrete, covered with hundreds of brass plates, each engraved with a name. Ethan walked closer and froze. Every plate bore the names of residents, all in perfect order. Some were old and tarnished, others freshly polished. Near the center of the chamber, one plate shone brighter than the rest. Ethan Calloway, reserved. He took a step back, his throat dry. "What the hell is this?" From behind him, Mrs. Crane's voice flowed softly through the air like silk sliding across glass. "This is where peace begins," she said. She stood by the doorway, her white suit glowing faintly in the half-light. "And where the wind rests when it's no longer wanted." Ethan turned his flashlight on her. "You're insane. What are you doing to these people?" Mrs. Crane smiled, calm, unbothered, ancient. "We keep the world calm. The air outside is chaos, noise, change. But here we've tamed it. We offer stillness, perfection. In return, the air takes what it needs, a breath, a soul, a whisper of life, to stay obedient. The hum deepened, resonating in Ethan's chest. The walls seemed to exhale. You're saying, you're feeding it? She nodded slowly. Every resident signs the covenant, whether they understand it or not. The wind feeds on unrest, on curiosity. It remembers who breaks the stillness. You, Mr. Calloway, have been rather loud. He shook his head, backing toward the door. We're leaving. Now. Mrs. Crane's expression darkened. The air won't let you. It already knows your scent. It already carries your name. She lifted her hand, and the mist around them began to twist. The air thickened, alive, spinning into visible form. A slow, swirling current of gold and gray, whispering fragments of voices. Ethan could hear words, names, apologies, and faint, pleading gasps. It wasn't just wind. It was every voice the air had taken. He ran toward the exit, but the door slammed shut before he reached it. The air caught his arm, not like a gust, but like a hand. Cold pressure wrapped around him, dragging him backward. He screamed, fighting it, but his voice was drowned in the roar that followed. A soundless roar, loud only inside his skull. Mrs. Crane's voice echoed through the chamber. Let it take you. You've already breathed too much of what it owns. The walls vibrated, the plates ringing like chimes. Ethan clawed against the floor, feeling his skin grow cold as the wind coiled around his chest, squeezing. It whispered in his ear, join us. Breathe with us. Be still. For one split second, he saw faces forming in the current, neighbors trapped in the flow, their eyes pleading for release. And then it stopped. The air went silent. Ethan collapsed, gasping, the mist pulling back into the walls. Mrs. Crane crouched beside him, her face illuminated by the faint golden glow. You see? She whispered. Stillness is mercy. It's peace. He stared at her, trembling. You're killing them. She smiled faintly. No, we're preserving them. Before she could stand, Ethan lunged forward, snatching the flashlight from the floor. He hurled it into the glass dome at the center of the room, the source of the hum. It shattered instantly, a burst of air exploding outward. For the first time since he'd moved to Highridge Estates, the wind moved. It roared through the chamber, tearing at the walls, ripping brass plates from their mounts. The faces in the air screamed as they were freed, swirling upward in a blinding rush. Mrs. Crane's voice vanished beneath the storm, her white suit dissolving into mist. Ethan staggered toward the stairs, the air pushing him upward, shoving him out. When he reached the surface, the entire neighborhood was awake, windows bursting open, trees shaking violently for the first time. The air howled like a wounded animal, finally unchained. Lights shattered, flags tore, and fences flew apart. Then just as suddenly everything went quiet. By morning, Highridge Estates was peaceful again. Too peaceful. The lawns were untouched, the streets flawless. No one seemed to remember what had happened. Lila sat on the porch, sipping coffee, staring out at the calm sunrise. When she turned, a cold draft brushed her cheek. Ethan stood behind her, still, silent, smiling faintly. Morning, she whispered. He didn't answer. The air around him was perfectly still. And on the community bulletin board that day, beneath the HOA's crest, a new notice appeared. Welcome our newest board members, Mr. Ethan Calloway. Beneath it, the words shimmered faintly in gold. Peace requires control. Control requires obedience.